My boss stood on the main stage of the world's biggest tech conference, presenting my stolen code as his genius invention. He didn't know I was in the audience, and he definitely didn't know I still owned the patent that could destroy him. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The auditorium at the Moscone Center smelled like recycled air, expensive cologne, and desperation. I was standing 4 rows back from the stage, squeezed between a venture capitalist in a fleece vest and a nervous founder trembling over his iPad. The lights were blinding, a wash of electric blue and stark white focused entirely on the man pacing the stage like he owned gravity itself. Jarred. He looked impeccable. He always did. He was wearing that signature dark navy blazer over a crisp white t-shirt, the uniform of the disruptor. He held the clicker in his right hand with a casual looseness, gesturing to the massive screen behind him as if he were conducting a symphony. The audience, 2,000 strong, hung on his every word. They weren't just listening, they were worshiping. "We didn't just want to improve cloud latency," Jarred boomed, his voice engineered to project humble confidence. "We wanted to eliminate the concept of waiting. We built Juno not as a tool, but as an ecosystem. A proprietary, in-house miracle of engineering." I felt a cold sweat prickle the back of my neck. Proprietary, in-house. The words landed like physical blows. I watched him, the same man who once asked me how to open a PDF, now lecturing the Silicon Valley elite on distributed efficiency in hybrid clouds. He was selling my life's work, my sleepless nights, my ruined relationships, and my panic attacks, packaged neatly under his personal brand. But that wasn't what made my breath hitch in my throat. It wasn't the theft. I had known for months that Jarred was a thief. That was old data. He clicked to the next slide, slide 6. A gasp rippled through the front row, followed by appreciative murmurs. On the screen, blown up to 20 feet tall, was a snippet of the core backend logic. It was meant to demonstrate the elegance of the architecture. Jarred turned to look at it, a proud smirk plastering his face, basking in the glow of the projection. My stomach dropped so hard, I thought I might vomit right there on the carpeted floor. There, frozen in high definition on the screen, was line 208. It was a dense block of C++ optimization, but the code itself didn't matter. It was the comment buried at the end of the line, displayed in faint green text that nobody else in the room would think twice about. SLV2 optimization after Montreal crash, AMR. AMR, Amanda Marie Rains. My initials. I had written that line 3 years ago, at 4:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, sitting on the floor of the server room because the AC in the office had broken and the servers were overheating. I had carved my name into the digital bark of the tree, a tiny, petty act of pride in a moment of exhaustion. Jarred hadn't scrubbed it. He hadn't refactored it. He hadn't even read it. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own brilliance, that he had copy-pasted my source code directly into his keynote presentation without bothering to check if the actual architect had left a fingerprint. He turned back to the crowd, his eyes scanning the room. For a split second, his gaze swept over the 4th row, our eyes locked. I stopped breathing. I waited for the flicker of recognition, the stumble in his speech, the flash of guilt. I waited for him to realize that the ghost of the woman he'd buried was standing right in front of him. But there was nothing. His eyes slid past me as if I were made of glass. He didn't see Amanda, his lead architect. He didn't see the woman who had saved his company from bankruptcy 3 times. He saw a face in the crowd, a blurred pixel in the high-resolution image of his success. He didn't know me. I was invisible in the shadow of my own legacy. "This is the future," Jarred said, clicking to slide 7, erasing my initials from the screen. "And we are the only ones who have it." I felt my hands shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. I realized then that the betrayal was worse than the theft. The theft was business. This absolute erasure of my existence was personal. He hadn't just stolen the work, he had convinced himself he had written it. I adjusted my glasses, took a deep breath of the stale conference air, and let the shock settle into something harder, sharper. You think you're the only one who has it, Jard? I thought, my voice ringing loud and clear in the silence of my own head. You have the slide deck, you have the stage, but you forgot to check the patent office. I didn't stay for the cue, and I couldn't bear to watch high. Deflect technical questions with buzzwords, knowing that if anyone pressed him on the actual kernel logic, he'd crumble. I pushed my way out of the auditorium, ignoring the annoyed glares of the tech enthusiasts I bumped into. Outside, the San Francisco air was gray and biting. I walked 2 blocks to a nondescript coffee shop, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the corner, staring at my phone. My hands were still trembling, the adrenaline of the encounter coursing through me like a drug. I pulled up the live stream of the event on my phone. Jard was still talking, now accepting an award for innovation in infrastructure. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me, the moment, 6 months ago, when everything had changed. The moment I stopped being his employee and started becoming his executioner. It was a Tuesday. I remembered the taste of the air in his office, conditioned, sterile, smelling faintly of lavender and expensive leather. I had walked into Jard's glass palace with a heart rate of 120, clutching a folder of performance metrics. I wasn't asking for the moon. I wasn't asking to be made co-founder. I was asking for a salary adjustment. Jard, I had said, my voice wavering slightly. I've benchmarked the industry standards. For a lead architect managing a stack of this complexity, my current compensation is in the bottom 10th percentile. Juno generated $12 million in revenue last quarter based on the latency patch I deployed. I'm asking for a 20% raise and 0.5% equity. I remembered how he looked. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk, scrolling through Twitter on his phone. He didn't even look up until I finished speaking. Then he leaned back. He actually leaned back, clasping his hands behind his head, stretching like a lion who had just eaten and couldn't be bothered with the buzzing of a fly. And then he laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It wasn't a nervous chuckle. It was a dismissive, incredulous bark. It was the sound of a man who couldn't believe his toaster had just asked for a vacation. Amanda, he sighed, shaking his head with a pitying smile. You always get so intense about these things. It's not intensity, Jard. It's math, I tried to argue, my face heating up. Look, he said, waving a hand dismissively. We're a startup. We run lean. That's the culture. And honestly, you're not really the negotiating type. You're technical, that's your lane. You write the code, we handle the business. That's the division of labor. You don't have let's call it the executive presence for equity. Executive presence. I stood there, feeling the floor drop out from under me. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was the realization that in his eyes, I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even a person. I was a resource. A highly functioning piece of hardware to be used until it burned out, then replaced. Is that a no? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's a not right now, he said, turning his attention back to his phone. Maybe next year, if the Series B goes well. Now, be a team player and fix that bug in the dashboard, yeah. I remembered the taste of metal in my mouth. It was the taste of my own pride dying. But in that coffee shop, watching him hold up his trophy on the live stream, I realized something. That meeting hadn't been a defeat, it had been a gift. If he had given me the raise, if he had thrown me a few crumbs of equity, I might have stayed loyal. I might have kept building his empire, grateful for the scraps. But his arrogance had severed the last thread of loyalty I had. He had made a fatal calculation error. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. He assumed that because I spent my life in the code, I didn't understand the law. He had forgotten the one crucial thing about engineers. We document everything. I tapped the screen of my phone, closing the live stream and opening a secure folder app hidden behind a calculator icon. Inside was a PDF file, scanned and dated 5 years ago. United States Patent and Trademark Office. Patent number US 9842A, inventor, Amanda Marie Rains. Assignee, Amanda Marie Rains. He didn't know, he couldn't know. 5 years ago, before Juno was even a company, before Jard had hired me out of that hackathon, I had filed the provisional patent for the core algorithm myself. I had done it on the advice of Harold, a semi-retired lawyer I'd met at a dive bar in Santa Clara. Harold smelled like old paper and bourbon, and he had looked me dead in the eye and said, "Kid, in this town, ideas are like dust. Ownership is the vacuum. Secure the mechanism before you show it to the vultures." I had paid him in cash and instant noodles. It was the best investment of my life. Because the patent wasn't for the software interface, it wasn't for the brand name, Juno, it was for the method of data distribution, the very engine that ran Jard's entire company. I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me. Jard thought he was the king of the world right now. He thought he had gotten away with it. But as I stared at the bustling street outside, I touched the screen of my phone, tracing the file name. He had built a skyscraper on land he didn't own. And he had just handed the detonator to the only person in the world who knew where the structural weaknesses were. To understand why I didn't just sue him the next day, you have to understand the depth of the deception. You have to understand the family. They hired me when I was 24. I was brilliant, socially awkward, and utterly naive. I had just won a hackathon with a prototype for distributed load balancing, and Jard had swooped in like a golden god. "We're not a company," he had told me over sushi that cost more than my monthly rent. "We're a mission. We're going to change how the world computes, and I want you to be the architect of that change." It was syrupy, manipulative nonsense, but I drank it up. I had never belonged anywhere. I was the girl who sat alone in the computer lab. Jard offered me a tribe. Or so I thought. The reality was a meat grinder. For 5 years, I worked 14-hour days. I slept under my desk more nights than I slept in my bed. I missed my sister's wedding because the server cluster in Virginia went down. I developed chronic migraines and a caffeine dependency that made my hands shake. And through it all, Jard and the board cheered me on. "You're a rock star, Amanda," they'd say, slapping a sticker on my laptop while they planned retreats to Bali that I wasn't invited to. The culture was carefully curated toxic positivity. "We're all in this together," they chanted, while the executives vested their stock options and the engineers burned out. But the real villain wasn't just Jard. Jard was the face, the charismatic frontman who could sell ice to an Inuit. The real danger, the dark matter holding the Juno universe together, was Margaret Dane. Margaret was the chairperson of the board. If Jard was a golden retriever with a god complex, Margaret was a viper in a Chanel suit. She was a legend in the valley, a woman who had never written a line of code in her life but had made hundreds of millions by gutting companies and selling the parts. She was the one who had instituted the meritocracy policy that somehow always resulted in men getting promoted. She was the one who had advised Jard to keep the engineering team lean and hungry. I had met her only a handful of times. The most memorable was a year ago during a board review. I had just presented the technical roadmap for the next 3 quarters. I was proud of it. It was aggressive but feasible. Margaret had sat at the head of the table, her gray eyes unreadable. She didn't look at my slides. She looked at my hoodie. "Jard," she had said, her voice soft and terrifyingly precise. "Your back-end support staff is brilliant, truly. But perhaps for the investor meetings, we keep the visible team a bit more polished. We need to project dominance, not the IT help desk." Back-end support staff. I was the lead architect. I had built the product they were selling. But to Margaret, I was just the help. I was the grease in the gears, necessary, dirty, and meant to be kept out of sight. Jard had laughed then too, a nervous, eager-to-please laugh. Right, Absolutely, Margaret. Amanda prefers the shadows anyway, don't you, Mandy? Mandy, I hated that nickname. Back in the coffee shop, the memory made my jaw ache from clenching it. They relied on my silence. They relied on my lane. They banked everything on the assumption that Amanda Rains would always be the quiet girl who fixed the bugs and took the insults because she loved the code more than she loved herself. But that girl died the day Jard laughed in his office. The Amanda sitting in the coffee shop was someone else entirely. This Amanda had spent the last 6 months playing a very different game. I hadn't just audited the code, I had prepared a dossier. Every time they deployed my algorithm, I logged it. Every time they claimed a new feature that was actually just a reskin of my old work, I timestamped it. And then there was the debug module. About 4 months ago, I had told Jard we needed better internal monitoring. To track cluster health, I lied. He signed off on it without reading the specs. I installed a subroutine, a heartbeat. It was invisible to their standard diagnostics. Every time the Juno platform executed a high-volume data transfer, the very feature that made them millions, the code sent a tiny, encrypted ping to a private server I rented in Iceland. It wasn't malware, it didn't steal data, it just counted. Ping, ping, ping. It was a ticker of their theft. A real-time ledger of exactly how much money they were making off my intellectual property. I checked the server logs on my phone now. The counter was spinning dizzyingly F. Asked, the Disrupt SF demo Jard was running right now. Ping, ping, ping. It was magnificent. I finished my coffee and stood up. The trembling in my hands had stopped. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. Jard was probably heading to the VIP afterparty right now, clinking glasses with investors, toasting to his brilliance. He had no idea that the support staff was about to pull the foundation out from under his entire world. I wasn't going back to the conference. I had a flight to catch. I walked out of the coffee shop and hailed a cab. SFO, I told the driver, International Terminal. I wasn't going home. I was going to Geneva. Because there was one person in this industry that Margaret, Dane, and Jard feared more than the SEC, more than bankruptcy, and more than God himself. Everett Cho, the CEO of RiftCloud. And I had a meeting with him at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Geneva was the antithesis of San Francisco. Where the Bay Area was manic, loud, and performative, Geneva was quiet, gray, and excruciatingly precise. It was a city of clocks and vaults, which made it the perfect place to bury a body, or in my case, a company. I hadn't slept in 24 hours, but the jet lag felt distant, like a buzzing in someone else's ears. I stood in the lobby of RiftCloud's European headquarters. It wasn't a glass palace like Juno's. It was a fortress of limestone and steel overlooking the lake. It projected permanence. Mr. Cho will see you now, the assistant said. She didn't smile. Efficiency didn't require smiling. I walked into the office. It was cavernous, minimalist, and terrifyingly silent. Everett Cho stood by the window, looking out at the jet dough. He was a man who had survived 3 dot-com bubbles and a federal antitrust hearing. He didn't wear a hoodie. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than my student loans. I had met him once, years ago, at a Women in Tech gala where I'd spilled wine on his sleeve. He had handed me a card then and said, "Call me when they forget who built the engine." "Ms. Rains," he said, turning around. His face was unreadable, a mask of polite curiosity. "You've come a long way to show me a PDF I could have opened in my email." "Some things require a handshake," I said, setting my briefcase on his heavy oak desk. "And I wanted to see your face when you realized what I was offering." I opened the briefcase and pulled out the physical dossier. It was 57 pages, bound in black. It wasn't just code, it was a forensic autopsy of Juno's success. Jard claims the Juno latency protocol is proprietary in-house tech, I started, my voice steady. He calls it the Hive. He's built his entire Series B valuation on it. He's currently disrupting SF with it. Everett picked up the dossier. I'm aware of Jard's claims. My engineers are impressed, frustrated but impressed. They shouldn't be, I said. It's not magic. It's a predictive caching algorithm based on user proximity. And it's not his. I slid the second document across the desk. The patent. Everett looked at the patent number. Then he looked at the filing date. His eyes narrowed. He flipped to the technical abstract, then back to the dossier I had compiled, the one showing the heartbeat, logs, the timestamps, the undeniable proof that Juno's Hive was actually my optimization 208. The room was so quiet, I could hear the second hand on the wall clock ticking. You filed this under your maiden name, Everett said softly, 5 years ago. Before I signed my employment contract, I confirmed. Before Juno was incorporated. The IP assignment clause in my contract applies to inventions created during the term of employment. This predates the company. It predates Jard's first pitch deck. Everett looked up. The mask dropped. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator realizing the cage door was open. Does he know? Everett asked. He thinks I'm a code monkey, I said. He thinks I'm technical talent with no business sense. He doesn't even know I'm in Switzerland. Everett closed the dossier. He placed his hand flat on top of it. What do you want, Amanda? A job? A buyout? We can match whatever Jard is paying you, double it. I don't want a job, I said, leaning forward. I want to sell the asset. I want to transfer the patent to RiftCloud Technologies. Lock, stock, and barrel. I want you to own the foundation of his house. And the price. I named a number. It was high, absurdly high, the kind of number that buys islands. Everett didn't blink. Done, but on one condition. Name it. You stay inside, he said. The transfer will take 48 hours to clear the international registry. During that time, I need you at your desk in San Francisco. I need to know how they react when the sky falls. I want eyes on the ground. I felt a cold thrill shiver down my spine. I can do that. Good, Everett stood and extend. D his hand. Pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Rains. I'll have legal draw up the transfer. By Friday, Juno will be operating on RiftCloud property. I shook his hand. It was dry and firm. By Friday, I said, Juno won't be operating at all. I was back at my desk in San Francisco by Monday morning, sipping lukewarm breakroom coffee as if I hadn't just orchestrated the corporate equivalent of a nuclear strike. The atmosphere in the Juno office was typical for a Monday, manic energy, the hum of open-plan chatter, the click-clack of mechanical keyboards. Jard was visible in his glass office, pacing back and forth while talking on his headset, gesturing wildly at a whiteboard covered in growth projections. He looked triumphant. The Disrupt conference had been a massive success. TechCrunch had run a feature on him that morning, the visionary who solved speed. I sat there, debugging a CSS error on the login page, watching him. It was a strange sensation, knowing the future when no one else did. I felt like a time traveler watching the seconds tick down to a catastrophe. It started at 10:14 a.m. I knew the exact time because I saw the courier walk in. He wasn't a standard delivery guy. He was a process server, dressed in a cheap suit, carrying a thick envelope with a red legal seal. He bypassed the receptionist, who tried to wave him down, and walked straight to the executive suite. I watched through the glass walls as the server handed the envelope to Jard's assistant. She looked at it, frowned, and knocked on Jard's door. Jard waved her in, annoyed at the interruption. He took the envelope. He opened it. I stopped typing. I leaned back in my chair, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I saw Jard pull out the cease and desist. It wasn't a standard letter. It was 30 pages of icy precision. Everett's legal team hadn't just sent a warning, they had sent a bill of sale for the apocalypse. It listed the patent number, the acquisition date by RiftCloud, and, crucially, the heartbeat logs. Jard froze. He stood there holding the paper, staring at it. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, he dropped the phone headset. It clattered onto his desk. He started reading. I saw his face change. The arrogant, visionary smirk evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He flipped a page, then another. His movements became jerky, frantic. He marched to the whiteboard and erased the growth projections with a single, violent swipe of his sleeve. He grabbed a red marker and wrote a single word: risk. He underlined it 7 times. By 10:30 a.m., the CTO, Marcus, was sprinting down the hallway. By 10:45 a.m., the VP of Legal had arrived, looking pale. By 11:00 a.m., the glass walls of Jard's office were covered with blinds. The fishbowl had gone dark. The Slack channels, usually full of memes and lunch orders, went dead silent. People could smell the fear. It's a primal instinct in the startup world, the scent of burning cash. "What's going on?" Brett, a junior engineer sitting next to me, whispered. He was a good kid, loyal to a fault. "Did we get acquired?" "I don't know," I lied, keeping my voice level. "Maybe it's a legal audit." "Jard looks like he's gonna throw up," Brett noted, peering over his monitor. At 2:00 p.m., the blinds opened. Jard stepped out. He looked composed, but it was a brittle, fragile composition. His eyes were red-rimmed. He clapped his hands to get the floor's attention. "Listen up, everyone," Jard announced. His voice was a little too loud, a little too strained. "We've hit a minor snag. Misunderstanding regarding some IP overlap with a competitor. It's standard hostility from legacy players who are scared of what we're building." "Standard hostility?" I almost laughed. "Legal is handling it," Jard continued, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But we might need to do some refactoring. Marcus will be leading a code review to ensure we're clear of any incidental similarities." "Incidental," I spoke up. The room went quiet. I didn't usually speak in all-hands meetings. I was the quiet one, the furniture. Jard turned to look at me. There was a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Yes, Amanda, incidental. Why?" "Because," I said, standing up slowly. "To refactor, the load balancing core would require rewriting the entire architecture from the ground up. The dependencies are hard-coded into the database layer. If we change the logic, the product stops working." Jard's jaw tightened. "We're not rewriting the core, Amanda. We're just adjusting the parameters." "The parameters aren't the problem," I pressed, keeping my face impassive. "The logic is. If the logic is the issue, then we don't have a product." "We have a product," Jard snapped, his composure cracking. "We have the best product on the market. Now, everyone back to work. We have a release to ship." He spun around and stormed back into his office, slamming the door. The engineers looked at each other. They knew I was right. You can't just adjust parameters on a foundational algorithm. It's like trying to change the foundation of a skyscraper without disturbing the penthouse. But Jard didn't understand that. He thought code was magic. He thought if he yelled loud enough, the syntax would change itself. I sat back down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A secure message from Everett Cho. "The first domino has fallen. Watch the news." I opened a new tab. There it was, a press release from RiftCloud. RiftCloud Technologies acquires core latency patent, announces new TrueSpeed platform. And the subheadline, competitors cited for infringement. Jard's phone started ringing, then the main office line, then the sales director's cell phone. The noise was a symphony, and I was the conductor. The next 3 days were a masterclass in organizational collapse. It wasn't instant. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. The first clients to leave were the enterprise accounts, the banks, the healthcare providers. They have compliance departments that actually read patent lawsuits. They saw RiftCloud's announcement, saw the C&D filing, and realized that using Juno was now a liability. Wednesday was a bloodbath. 5 major contracts pulled out before lunch. "We can patch it," Jard was screaming in the conference room. I could hear him through the drywall. Just change the damn code. Make it different enough. I watched Marcus, the CTO, walk out of that meeting looking like he had aged 10 years. He walked straight to my desk. Amanda, Marcus said, his voice trembling. He wants us to implement a randomized delay to the packet transfer. He thinks if we slow it down, it won't look like the patent. That will increase latency by 40%, I said calmly. It defeats the entire purpose of the product. I know, Marcus rubbed his temples. But he's not listening. Can you try to talk to him? He trusts you. You've been here since the beginning. He trusts me. The irony tasted like ash. I'll see what I can do, I said. I didn't go to see him immediately. I waited until 6:00 p.m. when the office had mostly cleared out. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway. Jard was sitting in his office, the lights off, illuminated only by the glow of his monitors. He was slumped in his ergonomic chair, staring at a spreadsheet that was bleeding red ink. I knocked on the glass door frame. Jard. He looked up. He looked terrible. His perfect hair was messy, his tie loosened. He looked smaller, like a boy wearing his father's suit. Amanda, he said. He sounded relieved. Come in, close the door. I walked in and sat in the chair opposite him. The same chair I had sat in 6 months ago when I asked for a raise. It's a mess, Mandy, he sighed, rubbing his face. RiftCloud, they somehow got their hands on a patent that looks exactly like our stack. I don't know how, maybe corporate espionage, maybe a leak. Maybe, I said. I need you to step up, he said, leaning forward, turning on the charm. It was dimmer now, less effective, but he was trying. Marcus is useless. He's panicking. I need a wartime general. I need someone who knows the code inside out. He paused, looking me in the eyes. I know we had that discussion about compensation a while back, and I want to make it right. If you can help us navigate this technical pivot, I'm prepared to offer you the lead architect role officially. And equity, real equity, 1%. 1% of a company he had just driven into an iceberg. 1%, I repeated. It's generous, Amanda. It's a founder-level stake at this stage, he lied. We're going to beat this. RiftCloud is just a bully. We're the innovators. We're a family, right? I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the eyes, the desperate need for validation. He didn't want my help. He wanted my permission to keep believing his own lie. He wanted me to tell him he was still a genius. Jard, I said softly, do you remember what you said to me when I asked for a raise? He blinked, confused by the pivot. What that was, look, I was under stress. You laughed, I said. You leaned back in that chair, right there, and you laughed. You told me I wasn't the negotiating type. You told me to stay in my lane. Amanda, come on, that was business, don't be emotional. I'm not emotional, I said. I'm technical, and technically speaking, you have a major problem. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the patent transfer agreement, but I had highlighted one section, Original Inventor. I slid it across the desk. Jard picked it up. He squinted at it in the dim light. He read the line. Inventor, Amanda Marie Rains. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I watched his brain try to process the information. I watched the denial fight with the reality. You, he whispered, you filed this. 5 years ago, I said. But you work for me. I work for Juno, I corrected. I filed this before Juno existed, and last week I sold it to RiftCloud. Jard dropped the paper. He looked at me with genuine horror. It wasn't the horror of bankruptcy. It was the horror of realizing the furniture had come to life and was holding a knife. You sold us out, he hissed. You traitor, after everything I did for you. Everything you did for me? I stood up. You underpaid me. You erased me. You stood on a stage and put your name on my code. You didn't give me a career, Jard. You gave me a trauma, and I just monetized it. I'll sue you, he spat, standing up, his face flushing purple. I'll bury you, breach of contract, fiduciary duty. My contract covers inventions made during employment, I said, reciting the clause I had memorized. This was prior art, and as for fiduciary duty, I'm not an officer of the company, I'm just technical talent. Remember. He looked like he was going to lunge across the desk. You destroyed this company, he shouted. There are families relying on these jobs, my reputation. Your reputation is a slide deck, I cut him off. And as for the company, Margaret Dane is already calling for an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I imagine she's not happy about the lawsuit. Jard went pale at the mention of Margaret. How do you know that? Because, I said, walking to the door, I'm the one who sent her the evidence. I put my hand on the doorknob. Wait, Jard yelled. Amanda, we can fix this, name your price. I can get the board to authorize a buyback, we can pay RiftCloud, just help me fix it. I turned back one last time. I didn't do this for money, Jard. I already have the money. Then why, he pleaded, why burn it all down? I smiled. It was the smile I had practiced for 6 months. The quiet, terrifying kind. Because you laughed, I said. I walked out of the office, leaving the door open. Behind me, I heard the sound of something heavy, maybe a lamp, maybe a trophy, smashing against the wall. But I didn't stop. I walked past the empty cubicles, past the motivational posters that said move fast and break things. I had moved fast, and now everything was broken. The boardroom on the top floor of the Juno headquarters was designed to intimidate. It was a glass cage suspended 30 stories above the city, offering a panoramic view of the fog rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge, a view that cost $40,000 a month in rent. I walked in uninvited. The receptionist had tried to stop me, stammering something about a closed session, but I had simply kept walking. The security badge still worked for now. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on. The entire board of directors was seated around the massive table made of reclaimed redwood. At the far end sat Jard, looking like a ghost of the man who had preened on stage just days ago. He was slumped in his chair, staring at his hands. But I wasn't there for Jard. He was already a casualty. I was there for the king, or rather the queen. Margaret Dane sat at the head of the table. She didn't look worried. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. She was peeling the wrapper off a bottle of sparkling water with the precision of a surgeon. You can't be in here, one of the board members, a man with a thick mustache and a thicker Rolex, barked. This is a restricted meeting. Margaret raised a single hand. The room went silent instantly. Let her in, Margaret said. Her voice was low, smooth, and terrified me more than Jard's screaming ever could. I assume this is the architect of our current inconvenience. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. I placed my hands on the wood, feeling the grain. I waited. You've made your point, Ms. Rains, Margaret said, finally looking up. Her eyes were slate gray, devoid of warmth. Jard was reckless. He cut corners. The board acknowledges this. We are taking steps to rectify leadership. Cleaning house won't fix the foundation, I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. You built an empire on a stolen engine. You didn't just cut corners. You knowingly deployed intellectual property that you didn't own. We licensed it, Margaret countered smoothly. There was a verbal understanding. Your employment contract implies. My employment contract is clear, I cut her off. And so is the patent office, and so is Everett Cho. Margaret's jaw twitched, a microfracture in the ice. She knew Everett. They had been rivals for 20 years. She knew that if Everett had the patent, he wouldn't settle for money. He would want blood. We can still salvage the company, Margaret said, leaning forward. The boardroom felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. You've made your power play. Congratulations. You've proven you. Ray not just support staff. Now let's talk business. What is the ask? The ask, I repeated. Everyone has a price, she said, her tone softening into something venomous. Equity, a seat on the board, a payout. If I release a statement naming you as the co-creator, publicly acknowledging your contribution, do you walk away? Do you call off Everett's dogs? I stared at her. For a second, I considered it. It was the validation I had craved for 5 years, the acknowledgement, the fame. But then I looked at Jard. He wasn't even looking at me. He was checking his watch. He didn't care. None of them cared. They were just trying to plug a leak so they could go back to sailing the ship. No, I said. Margaret's eyebrows lifted. No. Because you still don't get it, I said, standing up. This isn't about credit, it's about rot. I worked here for 5 years. I gave you my life. And not one of you, not Jard, not the board, once thought to protect the person keeping your lights on. You treated me like furniture. And now you're surprised the furniture has teeth. You're being emotional, Margaret said dismissively. That's why you'll never run a company. You let feelings dictate strategy. And you're extinct, I shot back, because you think you can spin your way out of gravity. Silence stretched tight across the room. Then Margaret did something I didn't expect. She smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. I underestimated you, she said. Everyone did, I replied. But be careful, Amanda, she added, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. You're not the only one with a long memory. You've started a fire, yes, but fire burns everything, even the person holding the match. Companies don't collapse because of truth. They collapse because of stories, and I control the story. I paused at the door. I looked back at her, sitting perfectly still in her designer suit, the captain of a sinking ship refusing to get wet. Then remember this, I said, delivering the line I had practiced in the mirror 1,000 times. You built your kingdom on sand, and now it's learning to drown you. I walked out, I didn't look back. Outside the boardroom, the hallway felt colder. Executives were avoiding eye contact. Engineers were whispering in huddles, looking at me like I was a bomb that had just gone off. I wasn't just the girl from the back end anymore. I was the earthquake. But Margaret's warning echoed in my ears. I control the story. I hadn't felt the aftershock yet, but it was coming. It started 3 hours later. I was back in my apartment, staring at a half-packed box of books when my phone pinged. It was an email. Not to my personal account, but to my old work email, which was forwarded to my phone. Subject: Urgent Security Concern, Internal Audit Body. Amanda, a breach has been detected in your former company account. A script flagged suspicious outbound data activity linked to your credentials. We are investigating a potential violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You may be contacted by authorities. I froze. It was Margaret's parting gift, a shadow war. She wasn't going to sue me for the patent. She knew she would lose that. She was going to dirty me. She was going to ruin me by implication. I opened Reddit. I went to the R Technology subreddit. There it was, a thread posted 20 minutes ago by a throwaway Juno insider. Title: The genius engineer who blackmailed her startup. Post: Everyone is praising the dev who took down Juno, but the real story is darker. She planted a backdoor. She stole user data to leverage a buyout. This isn't justice, it's extortion. The comments were already flooding in. Classic disgruntled employee. If she planted a backdoor, isn't that a federal crime? Sounds like she's unstable. They even had a photo, a grainy shot of me from 3 years ago, looking exhausted and disheveled after a 48-hour coding sprint. The caption read, "This is who they trusted." I felt the walls of my apartment closing in. Margaret was rewriting history in real time. She was turning my competence into criminality. If this narrative stuck, I wouldn't just lose the victory, I would lose my career. I would be radioactive. I didn't panic, I didn't cry. I did what I always did. I called for backup. I dialed Danica. Danica and I had shared a dorm wall at MIT. She had gone into cybersecurity while I buried myself in architecture. She was currently a lead forensic analyst for a firm that cleaned up messes for Fortune 500s. "Tell me what you really did, Amanda," Danica said the moment she picked up. No hello, no small talk, because your name just pinged on a watch list. I didn't steal data, I said, pacing my kitchen. I monitored usage. It was telemetry. They're saying you exfiltrated user PII, Danica said. They're building a case for espionage. It's a lie. They're manufacturing a trail. Then we prove it, she said. Give me access. For the next 12 hours, we worked in silence. I gave Danica the keys to my private repo. She ran a deep dive forensic audit on the logs Juno was leaking to the press. At 3:00 a.m., she found it. Got them, Danica whispered over the speakerphone. What is it? They're sloppy, she said. They exported data from your old machine, staged a push to a sandbox environment, and then backdated the logs to make it look like you did it last month. But they forgot one thing. Time zones, I guessed. Server drift, she corrected. The server they used to stage the fake hack has a clock drift of 3 milliseconds compared to the main cluster. Your hack happened 3 milliseconds after the server logs say it did. It's physically impossible unless you have a time machine. We had the smoking gun. By Friday, we had compiled a 300-page counter dossier. We didn't send it to the press. We didn't send it to Reddit. Everett's lawyer walked it directly into the office of the SEC investigator, assigned to the Juno inquiry. The impact was silent but total. By Monday, the Reddit threads had vanished. By Tuesday, Juno's board announced that Margaret Dane was resigning for personal health reasons. By Wednesday, the acquisition was finalized. Juno was dissolved. Its assets were absorbed into RiftCloud. Jard simply disappeared. His LinkedIn went to open to work, and then to stealth startup, the universal code for unemployed and hiding. I was clear, I was vindicated, I had won. But the victory felt hollow. I had burned down the castle, but I was still standing in the ashes. That's when the email from Dorian came. From Dorian Chen, Navaquint subject, the aftermath. Amanda, I followed the RiftCloud play. Brutal, elegant, classic you, let's talk. There's a table with your name on it and no Jareds in sight. Dorian Chen, the one person who had almost beaten me at that first hackathon years ago. He was now the CTO of Navaquint, the hottest AI firm in the valley. I met him at a Japanese whiskey bar in Palo Alto. The lighting was dim, the music low. Dorian looked expensive. He offered me a job that would have made my parents faint. CTO of a new division, he pitched. Total autonomy, your name on the door, we want the mind that killed Juno. It was everything I had ever wanted. Respect, power, ownership. But as I looked at Dorian, watching the way he swirled his ice, I realized something. Why now? I asked. Because you've proven you're dangerous, he said, smiling that same polished, shark-like smile I had seen on Everett. And dangerous people are only assets or threats. I'd rather you be an asset. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a weapon. He wanted to buy the gun that had shot Jard so he could aim it at his own enemies. If I took the job, I would just be trading one cage for another. A gold-plated cage, sure, but still a cage. I'm not building someone else's empire again, I said. Dorian's smile faltered. Then what will you do? The industry is small, Amanda. You're a free radical. That's a lonely place to be. I like the quiet, I said. I walked out of the bar. I walked out of the offer. 3 days later, I sat in my living room. No office. No team. Just me, a laptop, and a fresh pot of coffee. I opened a blank terminal window. The cursor blinked at me, a steady, rhythmic pulse. I wasn't going to build for Jard. I wasn't going to build for Everett. I wasn't going to build for Dorian. I typed mkdir mirror then, init-git. I called it mirror because the code would reflect exactly what you put into it. Transparency. No hidden layers, no stolen credit. I started coding. I wrote like I was exercising a ghost. I built the architecture I had always dreamed of: open source, decentralized, unbreakable. I put my name on every commit. Not hidden in a comment on line 208, but right there in the header. Author Amanda Rains. When I released the beta 6 weeks later, it hit #1 on GitHub within 24 hours. My phone started ringing. VCs, recruiters, journalists, even a timid text from Brett asking if I was hiring. I ignored them all. I poured another cup of coffee, pulled my hoodie up, and typed the next line. Jard was gone, Margaret was gone, the noise was gone. Now I owned every damn keystroke. And if the world ever forgot again, I wouldn't need a lawyer or a dossier to remind them. I would just write a better line of code.